So I mentioned in a previous video how Intel pretty much has an insane lead over AMD in terms of rendering times in Adobe Premiere, because Premiere uses the integrated GPU on Intel CPUs. Now, as I've been kind of looking at the warpath that AMD is going on in terms of competing with Intel and making these markets advance and giving them way more, I really think AMD going into iGPU accelerated things really would make a huge difference in terms of being able to give consumers more options. But Powerman, you might be asking, AMD makes APUs, but they're only quad cores, and they're at the bottom end of the stack every time new Ryzen CPUs come out. What the hell are they gonna do compared to a 9900K with an iGPU? It also doesn't help that the APUs are a year behind in terms of the technology they use. So if AMD can't put an iGPU in every Ryzen CPU that they offer without really holding everything back technologically, what else can they do? Well, I think integrating it into the motherboard might be the answer. Now, with current X570 motherboards that are out now, the lowest end you could really get is like $180. Now, that price is understandable considering X570 motherboards generally tend to be pretty nice, and they all support PCI Express 4.0. And with AMD's current dominance in the desktop market, and all the OEMs making tons and tons of crazy expensive motherboards, I highly doubt that X670 is gonna go back to X470 prices. But it's really hard for motherboards to have distinguishing features between one generation and the next, and for some reason, motherboard makers really want you to have to buy a new motherboard every year or two if you want to continuously upgrade. Kind of the way I imagine the way that this would go is that AMD in Ryzen 4000, as a way to follow up the excellent PCIe 4.0 support they added to X570, they say, hey, every X670 motherboard has some level of integrated Navi or maybe even Vega graphics on it. From a motherboard manufacturer's perspective, I think it'd really be interesting if, given a range of iGPUs that they could put into whatever motherboard they want, maybe you could have like something like the $700 Aorus X670 Extreme, next year, but it would have the highest end integrated graphics. From AMD's perspective, I'm thinking about how integrated GPUs could really allow them to sell stuff to companies or people that really need good CPU performance, but don't really care about discrete graphics. Now you might be asking, who really needs that? What business needs that? But if you think about it, right? There are probably businesses that need a good CPU, and all the OEMs they buy from, whether it's HP and Dell, those are all using Intel stuff, and they all have integrated graphics. They have no discrete graphics in those work machines. I think there's a lot of businesses out there that are still under Intel's control that could really do with something like a 3700X and some integrated graphics. If AMD is trying to sell these chips that are the same price but have way better performance and more cores than Intel, and the iGPU is just the main factor that they need for OEMs, I think that it would just be worth it for them in the end. Even though it's gonna be very expensive at the beginning, kind of like the prices of X570 now, I really think that in the long term, as this technology gets refined and stuff, it's gonna trickle down to lower and lower end motherboards like the B series, and maybe even some OEM, maybe even low end OEM motherboards. And that's going to be kind of AMD's long game in order to really sell people and sell OEMs on their CPUs better. I think that AMD, if they really wanted to go after every advantage Intel had, AMD would be smart to use their generally better integrated graphics and teach people how to really optimize for that. So that way, even in Adobe Premiere rendering, Intel is just getting handily beat by AMD. I think there's only a couple of problematic parts of this idea. Now, I kind of understand why the integrated GPU is never in the motherboard itself rather than the CPU on modern hardware. Passively cooled motherboards have been a really big thing for the past 5 or 6 years, and I understand that adding an integrated GPU into the motherboard would really make that impossible. But X570 brought the motherboard fans back for the PCI Express 4.0 requirements, and people are putting up with that now. I also think that putting the integrated graphics on the CPU allows it to get access to way better cooling, because a crap stock cooler is probably going to be better than the beefiest motherboard fan. I mean, the current chipset fans on X570 are fine as is. We'll have to see how long before they all crap out. But having integrated graphics, you're probably going to need a better fan than what there is currently. And that just means, you know, more reliance on a moving part that's likely to fail. There's also the issue that we see in APUs where the GPU performance is limited by the RAM speed. DDR5 is not expected to come out for another couple of years. And I doubt that DDR5 is going to be that much faster than DDR4 to where these GPUs are going to become like an RX 580 all of a sudden. I've heard people propose the idea that AMD should put a little bit of HBM2 on Ryzen APUs in order to fix this issue to get way more GPU performance. But the problem is that HBM2 is insanely expensive, and I highly doubt the motherboard manufacturers are going to really put HBM2 on anything. Yeah, so that's just my proposal, or my idea. I know AMD's already probably engineered it and tested this idea a ton if it is coming out in 2020 or 2021, but, you know, if that happens, you know, I'll gladly take credit for the idea. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.